Welcome to today's deep dive. We're jumping right into something that's honestly a little uncomfortable today, but, in a really good mind-expanding way.
Yeah, uncomfortable is probably the perfect word for it. We're looking at a premise that challenges, well, basically everything modern society considers to be the peak of morality.
Exactly. So picture this. It's 1982. An audience in Calcutta is listening to a discourse, and the speaker is up there essentially arguing that donating to international charity, fighting for global literacy, even advocating for basic human rights.
Right, the things we usually think make someone a good person.
Totally. The absolute pinnacle of being a good person. And the speaker suggests that these exact things might actually be the mechanisms keeping global oppression alive.
It's the ultimate philosophical Trojan horse.
Yeah.
Because we are conditioned, almost from birth, right, to view humanism as the finish line of our moral evolution.
Right. You just expand your empathy, you include all of humanity regardless of race or nation, and boom, you've made it. You're ethically complete.
Exactly. But what this 1982 discourse, which is titled Pseudo-Humanism, argues with just terrifying precision, is that humanism is not the summit at all. It's a stepping stone. And if we set up camp there, it becomes a trap.
And that's exactly what we are unpacking for you today. We have excerpts from this fascinating discourse, and it's actually a foundational text for a much broader, highly optimistic philosophy. It touches on neo-humanism and something called PROUT, which stands for Progressive Utilization Theory.
Yeah, and our mission for you, the listener, is to really challenge those fundamental assumptions you have about how we connect to the world.
Because if you truly engage with this, by the time we finish this deep dive, the way you look at a starving community or a stray animal on the street, or even the geopolitical moves of a developed nation, it's going to completely change.
For sure. You'll start to see this invisible scaffolding of exploitation that just hides right in plain sight, often draped in the banner of human kindness,
Yeah. So the discourse starts by identifying the basic building block of human connection. It calls it socio-sentiment. And on the surface, that sounds like a pretty standard sociology term, right? Just the feeling of belonging to a group.
Right. But the text applies this rigorous, almost geometric logic to it. It argues that empathy isn't just this vague, fuzzy, emotional state. It operates under strict mechanical constraints. It has a radius.
Okay, let's break down this radius theory, because this is where the philosophy immediately gets super practical.
Right. So for any sentiment to actually function in the real world, its radius must be greater than 0, but strictly less than infinity.
Okay, let's visualize that. Think about a Wi-Fi router in your house. If the router has a range or a radius of absolute 0, it connects to nothing. Your phone has no internet. It's an isolated, meaningless box.
That's a great analogy.
Right. And on the other extreme, if the tech company tells you, oh, this router has an infinite radius, it covers the entire universe simultaneously. They're talking about pure theoretical nonsense.
Yeah, an infinite radius is a concept. It's not a tool. And the author applies this exact logic to human empathy. Everything practical exists somewhere in between 0 and infinity.
So our human empathy router, our socio-sentiment, it has to have a defined expanding range to actually do anything.
Exactly. The smallest practical radius is family sentiment. Your gravity is strong enough to care for your immediate kin, making sure they survive alongside you.
But then human society gets more complex. Survival needs grow. So the radius can't stay stuck at the family level forever.
Right. It expands to encompass a caste or a tribe. Then it pushes out again to community sentiment. And eventually, with modern infrastructure, it stretches to national sentiment.
Which is wild when you think about it. You
Yeah.
feel this deep bond with millions of people you will literally never meet just because they're inside the Wi-Fi range of your shared national identity.
Totally. And the text gives these extremes very specific names. The narrowest, most restricted forms of group empathy are called socio-sentiment minimitis.
Minimitis, like a disease of being too small.
Yeah, exactly. It's when your radius is so tight it suffocates you. You only care for a microscopic faction, and everyone just outside that tiny circle is a threat.
And then there's the absolute largest expansion, stretching that radius out as far as it can possibly go to cover the whole human species. The text calls that socio-sentiment maximitis, or excellentio.
It's the maximum limit of our empathy router. But this is where the text gives us our first major warning. It says, sure, there might be some razor-thin philosophical difference between maximitis and excellentio, like one is theoretical and one is practical. But it aggressively warns us not to get bogged down in debating that tiny difference.
Because arguing over the microscopic geometry at the extreme edges of our empathy is exactly how we get paralyzed. It distracts us from doing any actual good in the real world.
Right.
And to illustrate just how dangerous that intellectual paralysis is, the author tells this historical anecdote that is, honestly, it's hilarious, but it's incredibly grim.
Oh, the story of the Navadvip scholars.
Yes.
It perfectly captures the absurdity of over-intellectualizing while the world literally burns around you.
Okay, so the author describes these ancient logicians in a place called Navadvip. These guys were the intellectual elite, the ultimate pedants, and they decide to tackle what they think is this vital, reality-defining question.
Right.
So here's the question. When a palmyra fruit, which is like this massive, heavy coconut-type fruit, when it falls from the top of a tree, does the sound of the fruit hitting the ground happen slightly before it makes contact or slightly after it hits the ground?
Which is just a total useless debate. I mean, whether the sound precedes the impact by a millisecond changes absolutely nothing about the physical reality of the fruit or the ground.
Nothing at all. But to them, this was peak intellectual inquiry. So these scholars, they gather beneath this grove of towering palmyra trees. They sit down to observe and debate. And they don't just chat for an hour. They debate this for 3 full days and 3 nights.
Without sleeping.
Without sleeping. They refuse to sleep until they solve this puzzle. And to stay awake through this marathon, the text notes they consumed an ungodly amount of snuff.
Yeah, it specifies 5 mounds of snuff, which translates to roughly 411 pounds of powdered tobacco.
Wait, 411 pounds?
That's what the text says.
That is just, you have to picture the madness here. These esteemed scholars are tweaking out of their minds, covered in tobacco dust, screaming at each other about the theoretical physics of sound, completely oblivious to where they are actually sitting.
And that leads to the punchline. When the villagers finally came out to the grove at daybreak after the 3rd night, they found the debate was over, because almost all the scholars were dead.
And it wasn't the tobacco that killed them.
No, it was the subject of their debate. While they were arguing about the theory of the falling fruit, the actual physical palmyra fruits dropped from the branches and crushed their skulls.
It is dark comedy at its absolute finest. But the metaphor is just devastating. The author uses this to show how theoretical debates completely blind us to the physical realities crashing down on us. He compares it to arguing whether the oil is in the pot or the pot is in the oil.
Right. You spend all your energy on linguistic puzzles. You are entirely useless to the actual world.
And you can draw a direct line from those scholars to today. I mean, think about social media. People paralyze themselves with multi-day debates about the perfect way to help humanity.
Oh, for sure. Policing terminology, writing 10,000-word essays, tearing each other apart over ideological labels.
Exactly. And while they're consuming massive amounts of digital snuff arguing over theory out in the real world, the metaphorical fruits are literally crashing down on people's heads. Communities are starving, ecosystems are dying.
The warning here is that theory without practical application is just narcissism. The goal isn't to sit under the tree and theorize. The goal is to aggressively expand your empathy radius and use it to alleviate suffering. But, and this is a big but as we push our socio-sentiment outward, we hit a massive structural roadblock.
Right, because our empathy grows to the size of our nation, and we see the destruction caused by nationalism. We see borders, wars, xenophobia. So the logical next step is let's expand the radius again. Let's aim for internationalism.
We build the United Nations, sign global treaties, talk about the international community.
But the text drops a philosophical bomb here. It argues that internationalism is completely incapable of creating world peace.
It's a structural impossibility, and it comes down to the definition. Internationalism inherently relies on the existence of separate divided nations. You can't have an international framework without borders.
And if the container of the nation exists, then the job of that container exists. And a nation's job is to secure the survival of the people inside its borders. The text is very specific about this, securing the 5 fundamental requirements of life.
Food, clothes, education, shelter, and medical care. If you are the leader of a nation, your mandate is not the globe. Your mandate is your citizens.
Right. So place that mandate into a world with finite resources. Even if everyone's smiling at a diplomatic summit, you have separate entities competing for the same pool of resources to fulfill those 5 needs.
It's a zero-sum game disguised as a potluck. And what's the mathematical result? Eventually, to secure a higher standard of living for its own people, one nation will attempt to thrive on the lifeblood of another.
The lifeblood.
Yeah, they'll extract resources, exploit cheap labor, monopolize trade routes, and when the exploited nation realizes it's being drained, it pushes back. That friction is exactly what leads to a world war.
So internationalism fails because borders preserve competition. But okay, let's play devil's advocate. What if we just erase the borders? What if we dismantle the nation-state entirely and just achieve that socio-sentiment maximitis? General humanism, everyone is one giant global family. Doesn't that solve it?
That is the utopian dream. But this is exactly where the discourse pulls the rug out. This is the central thesis. General humanism is not the cure. Erasing borders doesn't erase human greed. In fact, general humanism suffers from two massive blind spots that let exploitation mutate into something much worse.
Okay, let's unpack these blind spots. The first one the text calls the intra-humanistic clash. This is where humanism gets adulterated, where our charity and global outreach become a smokescreen for sinister motives. This is pseudo-humanism.
It's the weaponization of empathy. Pseudo-humanism is when actions that look like charity are actually deployed as a cover for economic and cultural exploitation. And the text gives real-world examples that really force you to rethink global aid. Let's look at the first one. Food aid to starving populations.
Which, on the surface, is the purest form of humanism, right? People are starving, you give them food, you save lives. What could possibly be malignant about that?
The malignancy is in the underlying motive and the long-term outcome. The text points out that the nation providing the aid isn't always operating out of pure respect for human life. It's a calculated strategy. They think if we provide them food, they survive. But more importantly, they become dependent on our surplus.
So they aren't just saving lives, they're engineering dependency.
Precisely. The ultimate goal, according to the text, is to turn the starving group into permanent suppliers of cheap raw materials for the providers' industries. And because they're kept alive, but not allowed to build their own farms, they become a captive market. They're forced to buy the finished products created by the nation that feeds them.
It's a staggering realization. It's just a down payment on a permanent underclass. You feed them enough subsidized grain so they have the energy to mine your copper. And because your free grain bankrupted their local farmers, they have no leverage.
Right.
So they mine the copper, you take it, build expensive electronics, and sell it back to them, all while patting yourself on the back for being a great humanitarian.
It's a vicious cycle. And the second example is maybe even more insidious because it targets the mind. Educational aid or literacy drives.
Again, teaching people to read is a human right. We instinctively view it as good. But the text argues these literacy drives are often Trojan horses for cultural annihilation.
The provider looks at an educationally marginalized group, feels pity, and says, let's build schools. But through that process, they inject their own ideologies, their own historical narratives into the students' minds. The text explicitly says the goal is to mentally paralyze them.
Wait, how does teaching someone to read paralyze them?
By controlling what they read.
Yeah.
You teach them the colonizer's language. You give them books that implicitly say their native culture is primitive and the provider's culture is the pinnacle of civilization. You strip away their intellectual independence. They become literate, but in a system designed to make them feel inferior.
Wow. You build a psychological prison and convince the prisoner the bars are a gift? As I was reading this, I couldn't stop thinking about how this plays out in modern tech. Like the freemium model used by big tech monopolies.
No, that's an interesting parallel. Walk us through that.
So imagine a massive tech conglomerate goes into a developing region. They make this huge PR announcement. Internet access is a human right. Out of the goodness of our hearts, we're giving free smartphones and subsidized internet to millions of people.
Right. It looks like pure humanistic philanthropy, bridging the digital divide.
Exactly. But anyone paying attention knows the goal isn't altruism. The goal is data harvesting and ecosystem lock-in. By giving away the device for free, they bypass local tech development. They onboard millions of users into their specific walled garden.
Oh, I see.
Once those people rely on that network for commerce and news, the monopoly starts extracting. They track habits, sell data, control information. They strip away the digital independence of the whole region. The user isn't the beneficiary. The user is the product. It's the exact same pseudo-humanistic strategy as the food aid.
That is a brilliant modern application of the concept. And the discourse explains the psychology behind why this happens. It traces it back to vanity and a superiority complex.
The mindset of pity.
Yes. The moment you look at another group and think, I pity them, you failed the test of true humanism. Pity is hierarchical. It places you, the provider, on a pedestal. You aren't treating them as equals, you're treating them as subordinates to be managed.
The text calls this pseudo-humanistic strategy, preaching idealism outwardly while stabbing people in the back economically.
And alongside the pseudo-humanist, there's another concept that is just devastatingly relevant, the pseudo-reformist.
This part genuinely stung to read because we see these people every single day. How does the text define the pseudo-reformist?
A pseudo-reformist is usually someone from the comfortable privileged class. When a marginalized group demands structural change-like land redistribution, the pseudo-reformist doesn't oppose them openly. They adopt the language of the movement. They say, I hear you, your grievances are valid.
I stand with you.
Right. But then comes the pivot. They say, however, we must be practical. If we change everything tomorrow, society will collapse. What they actually mean is, it will be too disruptive to my comfort. So they preach incrementalism. Let's go step by step. Let's form a committee.
Yes.
But the text exposes their true nature. The pseudo-reformist has already secretly decided they will use their influence to ensure no real structural change ever happens.
It's weaponized bureaucracy, death by 1,000 task forces. You don't build a dam to stop a river. You dig 100 tiny diversion channels until the water just dissipates into the mud. They look like your greatest ally, but internally they are the barricade protecting the status quo.
Exactly. And this insidious exploitation, whether it's toxic charity or blocking change, it scales all the way up to the global macroeconomic stage. The text argues this exact mindset dictates the wealth of nations today.
Which leads to this highly provocative deconstruction of the global economy. The text looks at the developed world and basically calls it a myth. It says general humanism practiced by powerful nations is just enlarged nationalism.
The author makes an uncompromising economic statement. When looking at the global divide, none of the so-called developed nations actually stand on their own legs.
Let's really dig into that. The author suggests rich nations didn't get rich just by being innovative or working harder.
Right. They maintain their status through what the text calls circumstantial pressure. They compel undeveloped nations to buy their high-priced industrial goods while extracting raw materials from those same nations at a fraction of their true value.
So structural economic traps. They offer loans with brutal conditions. We'll give you capital for infrastructure, but you have to privatize your water and export cash crops to us.
Which destroys the undeveloped nation's self-sufficiency. They sell their lithium or coffee cheaply to pay the debt interest. The developed nation manufactures advanced goods and sells them back at a huge markup. The text argues that without this vampiric extraction, the developed world would instantly collapse.
And if we follow that to its logical conclusion, it's a terrifying trajectory because the resources of the global south minerals, arable land, they aren't infinite, they're depleting. So when the resources required to maintain that extravagant standard of living start running dry, what happens?
The pseudo-humanistic mask slips completely. The text says developed nations will inevitably resort to raw, naked force to maintain their standard of living. Physical force, like military intervention, or intellectual force, like predatory financial blockades. They will drop the pretense of humanism to ensure the resources keep flowing.
And this control isn't just economic. This fake humanism seeks total hegemony, social, political, cultural, and even religious control.
The cultural and religious dimensions are devastating. The text warns that once you capture a population's cultural life, you achieve total enslavement. If you control what they value, what they view as success, you don't need chains, they'll voluntarily police themselves.
The discourse also looks hard at how religion is co-opted. It describes wealth corrupts religious institutions to create satellite groups.
Yes, propagators of religion, funded by the wealthy class, preach doctrines focusing entirely on the afterlife. They teach marginalized groups that poverty is a spiritual virtue. It paralyzes the population, keeping them docile and obedient.
The text contrasts this corrupted religion with something it calls Bhagavata Dharma. Let's define that, because it sets up the alternative we're moving toward.
Bhagavata Dharma is the true spiritual nature of humanity. It's an all-embracing Dharma that seeks profound connection and liberation for all entities. It drives toward universal welfare, not just welfare for a select few. When religion is weaponized to create subservient satellite groups, it drifts miles away from that true universal core.
So synthesizing this, the first massive failure of general humanism is that it's a porous vessel. It allows humans to use the noble banner of humanity as a smokescreen to systematically exploit and colonize other humans.
But here is where the text takes its most radical turn. It poses a hypothetical. Let's assume we fix all of that. We eradicate pseudo-humanism. A utopian future where every human treats every other human with perfect equality and justice. No exploitation among humans.
Sounds like paradise.
But the author argues that even in that perfect utopia, the philosophy still completely fails. We'd still be on a path to total annihilation. Why? Because general humanism draws a hard, impenetrable boundary around the species Homo sapiens. It completely abandons the rest of the living world.
And that brings us to the second massive blind spot, the inter-creature clash. The biosphere is infinitely more than just humans. The text argues ignoring non-human entities actively shatters the planet's balance and mathematically results in the ruin of human life itself.
To illustrate the sheer arrogance of this human-centric worldview, the author provides a really powerful narrative, the story of the tiger and the village.
I love this example. It's so grounded. So visualize this. Humans decide they need more agricultural land. They bring in machinery and clear-cut hundreds of miles of ancient jungle. Now, what happens to the tigers, the elephants, the fauna that lived there for millennia? They lose their natural habitat instantly. They're thrust into absolute desperation. Driven by pure survival instinct, they wander into the newly built human settlements. A tiger attacks livestock, an elephant tramples a house.
And how does the humanistic society respond?
With righteous fury, we declare, these animals are bloodthirsty monsters. We must hunt them down to protect humanity.
This is where the discourse coldly dissects human hypocrisy. We immediately blame the animals, but the text insists the fault lies entirely with the humans.
Right, because we are the ones with advanced intellects. We knew what we were doing when we bulldozed the jungle. We destroyed their universe without pausing for a single second to provide alternative shelters or safeguards. We created their desperation, and then we play the victim when they act on survival instincts.
And the author makes us a chilling psychological connection here. He asks us to examine the tendency behind this destruction, the mentality that allows a human to thoughtlessly slaughter animals just because they are not human. The text argues this is the exact same psychological disease that drives the exploiter to persecute other human groups.
Let's analyze that. The author is saying animal cruelty and human oppression are essentially the same mechanism.
Yes, it's a failure of expansive empathy. If your socio-sentiment has a hard boundary at the edge of your own species, you've cultivated a capacity for absolute indifference. You've trained your brain to say, your existence has no value unless it serves me. Once that software is installed, it is impossible to keep it quarantined to animals.
Or leaks.
Exactly, it leaks. The exploiter who justifies destroying a forest today has built the exact same neurological framework as the dictator who justifies persecuting a marginalized human group tomorrow. It's the identical disease, denying the inherent value of another life form.
Wow. So humanism actually keeps the machinery of exploitation well-oiled. It says exploitation is valid, just don't use it on people. But you can't contain that fire. Once you legitimize ruthless exploitation of nature, it will eventually burn down human society. You can't practice cruelty from 9 to 5 and be a saint when you go home.
Precisely, which brings up an incredibly pragmatic question. If humanism is flawed, how do we actually navigate the real world? We still have to eat and build shelters. To answer this, the text introduces a paradigm shift in how we assign value. It all comes down to utility value versus existential value.
This concept completely rewired how I look at the physical world. Let's break these down thoroughly. How does the philosophy define utility value?
Utility value is entirely selfish and human-centric. It's the measure of how useful a creature or object is to human beings. Does this animal provide food? Does it do heavy labor? Is it aesthetically pleasing? If yes, it has high utility value, and humanism protects it because it serves us.
And on the other side, we have existential value.
Yes. Existential value is an entity's inherent, undeniable right to exist, simply because it was born. The text describes it as the right to exist as an expression of the supreme consciousness. It has value to itself, experiencing the joy and struggle of its own life, regardless of whether it does a single useful thing for a human.
To show how fragile our love for nature is under humanism, the text uses a brilliant analogy comparing cows and horses.
It's an undeniable illustration of conditional empathy. Walk us through it.
Okay, so look at cows. Human societies go to extraordinary lengths to protect them. Why? Because they have immense immediate utility value. Milk, cheese, leather, they're biological factories. We breed them by the millions, build shelters, dedicate veterinary sciences to them. We protect them fiercely, but entirely for our own benefit.
Contrast that with the fate of the horse.
Right. 150 years ago, horses were everywhere, the engine of human civilization, huge utility value. But then the internal combustion engine was invented. Almost overnight, the horse lost its utility value. And what happened? The vast herds are vanishing. They're relegated to niche sports. The text predicts eventually you'll only see horses in zoos. Because they don't serve an irreplaceable need, humans aren't spending resources to preserve them.
Their utility dropped to near zero, so our concern for their survival dropped to near zero.
And reading this text from 1982, I couldn't help but speculate about our immediate future. What happens to cows when their utility drops? Think about the biotech sector right now. Scientists are perfecting precision fermentation, lab-grown dairy, cultured meat, identical to the real thing without needing a living animal.
It's a very imminent technological reality.
So in 20 years, when we can brew better, cheaper milk in a vat, the utility value of the cow drops to zero. Based on the cold logic of humanism, humanity won't let billions of cows live in idyllic pastures. We won't feed them if they aren't giving us anything back. We'll either systematically starve them out by halting breeding or slaughter them to recoup losses, purely because they're no longer useful.
Because humanism lacks the philosophical framework to value them existentially. If they aren't a tool, they're a burden. But this is where we need to apply rigorous critical thinking. It sounds beautiful when talking about horses and cows, but I know you had a tough pragmatic pushback on this concept during our prep.
I did. Because it's easy to feel empathy for a cow. But what about creatures with negative utility value? Pests, mosquitoes carrying malaria, ticks, swarms of locusts devouring a village's food supply. Surely humanism dictates we have a moral obligation to eradicate them to protect human life, right? Does this new philosophy seriously demand we respect the existential value of the malaria mosquito?
It's the ultimate stress test for any philosophy of nonviolence. And the answer from the text derived from neo-humanism is affirm. Yes, even creatures with negative utility value, whose existence threatens our survival, have an inherent right to exist in the universe.
But how does that work in practice? We just let locusts eat our food, let mosquitoes infect us because we respect their right to bite us. That sounds like suicidal pacifism.
No, it doesn't demand passivity at all. This is where the neo-humanistic response radically differs from naive environmentalism. The text introduces a crucial caveat: the role of the human intellect. Humans have a superior intellect, so we carry a unique moral mandate. We are not supposed to lazily wipe out a species just because it's inconvenient or dangerous. We are tasked with using our massive intellectual capacity to create congenial environments and adequate safeguards.
Okay, let's make that concrete. So instead of developing a chemical bomb that exterminates an insect species, we use our science to build non-lethal barriers, advance repellents, or managing the ecosystem balance. We cure the malaria parasite rather than exterminating the mosquito host.
Exactly. We preserve their right to exist in the biosphere while aggressively protecting our own survival. If a tiger or a virus harms a human because we fail to put up proper safeguards, the text argues the fault doesn't lie with the creature. The creature is just acting on biological imperative. The fault lies with humans for failing to use our intellect. No entity ever conferred authority on humans to play God and extinguish life forms just because we couldn't be bothered to figure out a non-lethal solution.
This is a massive paradigm shift. Under humanism, we view ourselves as masters of the house. If there's a pest, we destroy it. But under neo-humanism, we're the architects and caretakers. We're the only ones with the cognitive ability to ensure the house accommodates everyone safely.
And stepping into that role requires moving beyond mere sentiment. It requires a structured scientific, spiritual, and economic revolution in our ethics.
Let's synthesize this incredible journey. We started with socio-sentiment, the geometry of empathy.
Yes. And we discovered that this sentiment, whether narrow minimitis or broad maximitis, is a mental disease if it relies on exploitation and utility. If caring for one group requires subjugating another or destroying nature, it's not a moral cure. General humanism is not the end of our evolution. It's failing us on a planetary scale.
But, and I want to lean into the highly optimistic, progressive energy of this discourse, this realization isn't a reason for despair. It's a thrilling call to evolve. The text has this beautiful poetic line that captures the human spirit. Not here, somewhere else, somewhere else.
Right, Navya Madhavadavada. It's a profound recognition that true justice and lasting happiness can't be found within our current humanistic systems. We have to keep moving forward.
We have to boldly embrace neo-humanism and PROE, which stands for Progressive Utilization Theory. It's an economic system that maximizes the physical, mental, and spiritual potential of all beings. Every single entity is valued fiercely simply because it exists.
It demands we elevate our consciousness. We must use our intellect not to extract, but to harmonize, to protect the vulnerable, whether they have 2 legs, 4 legs, or leaves. True scientific spirituality is about taking ultimate responsibility for the world, to make this world a better place for all to live with happiness and justice.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you with a final practical challenge. Tomorrow, when you walk outside, find something you'd normally consider totally, completely useless. A stubborn, ugly weed growing through a crack in the pavement. A stray insect on a brick wall. Stop and really look at it. Acknowledge it has zero utility value to you.
Right? It doesn't feed you or entertain you.
Exactly. And ask yourself, can my mind expand enough right here in this moment to recognize its existential value to itself? Can I see it fighting its own battle for survival as an expression of the universe? Because the moment you respect its inherent right to exist, you aren't practicing humanism anymore. You have stepped into something infinitely bigger. You are thinking like a neo-human.
It is the first step toward a radically different and profoundly more beautiful world.
If this journey challenged you and you want to explore the pure mechanics of these ideas further, to know more about neo-humanism and PREU, join a PREU study circle. You can also join the YouTube channels at Sadvipras Movement, that's SADVIPRAS Movement, and at New Human Project. Firm your understanding about scientific spirituality and a new ethics for the future humanity. For the authenticity of the original knowledge, do visit Ananda Marga Publications, or you can email them directly at ampsbooks@gmail.com. Thank you for taking this dive with us. We'll see you next time.